The Nishtana, the 4 questions, are certainly the highlight of the Seder night for many children. They spend time preparing beforehand, and then they get the opportunity to be in the spotlight as everyone listens as they recite it. But there's certainly something for us as adults as well in the Nishtana. I would like to share with you the explanation of the Malbim about the role of Nishtana in the Haggadah and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, recounting the Exodus from Egypt. Besides for being an explanation of the Nishtana, the words of the Malbim provide us with insight and direction as to how we should properly perform and fulfill the commandment of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, recounting the Exodus from Egypt. What's the main theme of Pesach in general, and the Seder night in particular? We know that the theme is that the Jewish people, they were slaves in Mitzrayim, they were slaves in Egypt. They didn't have control over their own lives. Their lives were dictated by what their Egyptian masters wanted them to do. And they had a bitter slavery in Egypt as they performed backbreaking labor for their Egyptian taskmasters. Then Hashem came along. Hashem sweetened the bitterness of the slavery. He took them out. Hashem ended the slavery in Mitzrayim. And then eventually Hashem took them out of Mitzrayim for the Jewish people to become free people. They started off being slaves, and Hashem took them out and made them into free people. The Malbim explains that if we look at the Nishtana, we could see this contrast in the Nishtana itself. The first of the 4 questions talks about the matzah. Matzah represents slavery. Matzah is a food that's eaten by people who don't have freedom. They're slaves. They eat only unleavened bread, almost cracker or wafer-like bread. They don't get to eat the more expensive leavened bread. Rather, they have to be content with the matzah, which is unleavened. The second question talks about the maror. Maror is bitter herbs, represents the bitterness of the slavery that the Jewish people encountered in Mitzrayim. As we go on to the third question talks about dipping. We know on the Seder night, we take the maror, which is bitter, we dip it in the charoises, which is sweet, to sweeten the maror, take away some of the sting, some of the bitterness of the maror. We dip it into the charoises, which sweetens it. The fourth question talks about the heseba, the leaning, the position that we eat in. We eat in a position of leaning on the Seder night, which also represents freedom. People who are slaves and aren't given the time to be able to sit and eat a normal meal, and they have to eat on the go. But free people, they sit and they can lean while they eat and take their time. So in the Nishtana, in the 4 questions, we see that the first 2 questions deal with slavery. The matzah, which is the food of slaves, and the maror, which is the bitter herbs, which represents the bitterness of the slavery in Mitzrayim. And the second 2 questions talk about the freedom which we show on the night of Pesach. That we sweeten the maror and the charoises, like sweetening the slavery, and the leaning, the position that we eat in on the night of Pesach, which shows the freedom that we're b'nei chayrin, that Hashem made us into free people. The Malbim explains that by pointing out this contrast right in the beginning of the Haggadah, before we start discussing the Haggadah, we right away get into the proper mood that we need to be in for saying the Haggadah. The Haggadah is supposed to be said with enthusiasm, with excitement, when we talk about the great miracles that Hashem did for us, and the great favor that Hashem did for us by taking us out from Mitzrayim, taking us from being slaves, from the bitter slavery, and making us into free people who can eat like in the position we eat on the night of Pesach. We can eat in a way like free people, which represents the fact that Hashem took us out from that slavery to being free. So when we say the Nishtana, we're supposed to take note of this contrast of the great favor that Hashem did for us, the great miracles that Hashem did for us. He took us out from the bitter slavery to the sweetness of being free men, and then that puts us in the mood, gives us the enthusiasm, the excitement to go then and go through the entire Haggadah, the entire Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, in a state of happiness, with enthusiasm, with excitement, which is the proper way in which we are supposed to tell over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, not just like reading another book, not just reading the text, but rather when we take note right in the beginning of the contrast between the position we were in and the freedom which Hashem took us out to. It's supposed to put us in the mood and give us the excitement to be able to say the Haggadah with excitement, with enthusiasm, the way it's meant to be.